Hello and welcome to our channel, MarshStream, your public performance broadcast platform. Please make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel. You can also donate to our tip jar and support the arts and artists of MarshStream by clicking the link below in the description. Check out our website, themarsh.org, for all upcoming live performances. Now, enjoy the show.
Now let's welcome Helen Stoltzfus. She's the longtime theater artist and founding co-artistic director of Black Swan Arts and Media, an Oakland-based theater that creates and produces original performance and multimedia works. Hello, Helen.
Hey, Stephanie.
How are you?
I'm good. Boy, that was an awesome list of things you guys are doing. It's pretty amazing.
We are doing still.
We are doing, despite the COVID.
And because of the COVID, this stuff.
Yeah, that too.
Because of the COVID. But we are looking forward to doing both. We get to do both.
Yes, I think it's changed our lives, indeed. I think we're going to start doing more of this kind of thing, for better or for worse.
That's right. It's almost a year. April 9th, it'll be a year. We have done more than 500 shows in this year. So it's been quite an expansion, a creative spurt.
And you're not tired of looking at the screen?
Well, I always looked at the screen. Just now I get to see more performances on it.
Yeah, that's good.
I was always looking.
Yeah,
which kind of brings me to my first question.
Yeah.
So both of us, we were talking, we had like a pre-interview.
Mm-hmm.
Unlike Meghan Markle and Oprah, who probably never talked before in their lives, we had a pre-interview discussion. And one of the things I brought up, which you of course might not have remembered, was that I met you on my 30th birthday, which I guess I have to say was almost 35 years ago. In 2 weeks, 35 years ago.
So you're probably the person that I've known the longest in terms of like the art scene in San Francisco. I mean, because that was like right after I arrived, I think.
Well,
anyway.
Where did you come from? Who were you?
You mean I don't look like a California girl?
Oh my God, you should have seen Helen back there. Her hair was at least 6 feet long to her feet, practically, totally blonde.
Yeah.
She was a goddess.
And now?
A goddess.
See, this is what happens. People start talking about you in the past. But I came from New York, and at the time, I mean, let's not go through the litany of East Coast cities we were living in, but yes, from New York City to San Francisco. And then I did a workshop with Stephanie, and she started the Marsh 3 years later, and now here she is, still doing it.
But you started something yourselves. What did you start?
I didn't so much start as join. I joined a traveling Jewish theater and was with them for several decades. And then Albert and I, co-partner in crime, started Black Swan Arts and Media about 17 years ago or something like that. And right after remember it to look in that camera. Yeah, still getting used to this Zoom thing. Yeah, and so we've been doing that, creating and producing our own work. Yeah.
So is Black Swan, is that completely focused on you creating and performing your own work? I mean, so when you were at the Traveling Jewish Theater, you were creating and performing
our own work.
All the it was your work and the members of work, and so your focus was that. It wasn't on like the Marsh. I just didn't create anything for 35 years. I worked with other people. But in your case, you were creating and performing your own works, correct?
Correct. And when we started our organization, Albert and I, first we were bringing professional artists into schools throughout the Bay Area, which was great, except that the funding just wasn't there. And we wanted to do our own work again. I was, spending too much time being an administrator instead of an artist. And so then we became Black Swan Arts and Media. Before that, we were called ALICE, Arts and Literacy and Children's Education. Anyway, so we have been creating our own work. Now we bring in other artists often for the works that we did. We did a piece on immigration that was a music aerial work with silks, and we brought in, trapeze artists and people to do that. And then we did a piece about the post 9/11 wars, which was a feast for 100 people, and we had, all kinds of musicians and dancers and performers for that. But we write the work and produce it. And then Albert created the Lost American Jazz Book, which is a concert of original work that sounds like the old standards that you used to hear, but all completely new music, original, award-winning, might add. Has won several awards, Independent Music Awards, Album of the Year, and then I created this piece, partly out of, I've been doing so many works with so much tech. It was like I just wanted to do something that wouldn't have any tech. No lights, no sound, no nothing, and just be able to perform it anywhere. This was before COVID, and so I thought I could do it in places. So now
it's all tech again. You don't use much of it.
But it is, it is fairly simple in terms of, it's just me talking for the most part. So that's been the story over the last several decades.
And when you put on these productions, where were you putting them on?
Various places. We rented the Bellevue Club, which is this gorgeous little jewel in Oakland that nobody knows about, to do the feast for 100 people and post 9/11 stories from Iraqis and Afghans and veterans of the Iraq and Afghan wars. We also did the immigration piece at Artaud and at Laney College. So, just different places depending on sort of what the piece called for and where we could go with it. Yeah.
And then you talked about this piece that we're going to, in a few minutes, hear a little excerpt from and then see the whole thing on the weekend. What made you put this together? What's the history of this performance?
So I think the main impetus for it was after I returned from Mongolia, which is part of the piece, I finally sat down and read all the books about climate that I had just been denying, ignoring. I mean, I knew they were there and I knew it was really bad and I just couldn't deal with it. Sound familiar? And so I sat down and read them. And you can't read the facts and not feel, in my mind, feel driven to do something. And so I wanted to create a piece that dealt with that in some way, but not in a generic way. And I also had come back from this trip to Mongolia, which was its own story. I've been following the bear for about 30 years, which the Mongolian story is part of. This animal that has had a hold on my imagination and my spirit for a long time. And then I had these ancestral stories that I wanted to tell. I think part of getting older is realizing the importance of those stories and wanting to pass them on. And so I had all these different elements and I was trying to choose like which, and then I just decided I would do it all, like just put them together and see what happened. And because of course they're all interrelated. And so, yeah, Dispatches is kind of what happened out of that. And it's gone through, it continues to evolve. It's evolved in the last few months, it's evolved this week. So it keeps changing. At some point, I think it'll settle down, but I'm always discovering new things, like what's really going on, what really happened back then, you know?
So how long have you been working on this piece?
I would say about a year and a half. 2 years, year and a half, two, yeah. I mean, here's the thing. There's parts of this piece that I wrote 30 years ago when I did another piece about my relationship to the bear. At that point, I was just introduced to the grizzly bear, went to Alaska to see them, totally entranced by them, and then wrote a piece about my relationship to the bear, both as a mythical being, also as an endangered animal in the wilderness and my connection with it. And Yeah, and so it's gone through a lot of different versions since then, but there's parts of it that are quite old and then parts of it that are recent. So yeah.
Well, since I don't quite know where to go with the bear questions, and I want to hear a lot more about the bear, frankly.
Yeah.
But I want to be informed based on what the excerpt you might be doing now. Do you think it might be a good time to move into the excerpt?
This is the Gobi Bear from Mongolia. Just so you know, it's not part of the excerpt. I just wanted to show that as a little tease. So I'm going to share, just give you a brief introduction. So the part that I'm going to share right now is near the beginning of the piece, part of dispatch number 2. And it really sort of shows my first meeting with the bear, sort of how the bear first came to me. And the story that I'm starting with happened 30 years ago when I was ill, had something called chronic fatigue syndrome. And so the story picks up from that point. And so I enter a program for chronically and terminally ill patients and attend group therapy sessions where one day the therapist asks us to imagine an animal, a predator that will go after our illness for us. And to my surprise, out of a crayon on paper, a mother bear draws itself as though she were underground, and I had to go underground to find her, to the subterranean land of illness and solitude. And in that hibernation of the soul, the image of a mother bear grows on me. At first, because of the sheer biological wonder that she is. Fact, a grizzly bear, a mother bear, goes beneath the ground, does not urinate, defecate, eat, or drink, but gives birth, nurses, and licks to life tiny cubs the size of squirrels, and then resurrects out of the ground magically 9 months later. And this mythical animal then is celebrated for millennia as a symbol of renewal, rebirth, transformation. Bears are the first deity humans ever worshipped. And growing inside me is a kind of knowing on some primal level that this is what I need. Not the God of my Christian upbringing, not even the doe-eyed, compassionate Jesus of the Mennonites. No, what my soul calls out for, despite my own bewilderment. Wait, I'm not New Agey. I don't believe in other people's religions. I don't appropriate other people's gods. Despite all that, what I know is that it is this all nurturing yet fierce predator that I crave, this god of the underworld whose fetid smell is all encompassing and whose fur is so soft that you can sink your hand into it. And her milk, when she nurses me, is sweet and rich, sliding down my throat, filling me, giving me back my life, my health, so that I begin imagining her in visitations, visualizations. So vivid are these encounters that I almost can't wait to sit and close my eyes and imagine her licking my wounds and holding me as she would her cub. But I am still exhausted and I am still headachy. And so I finally see a doctor who performs a laparoscopy, after which I learned that both my barrenness and my fatigue may be explained by the condition endometriosis. It's an immune disorder in which menstrual blood from the womb travels and implants itself in other parts of the body, and which is now shown in recent studies to be linked to the toxic chemical dioxin, such that the higher the level of dioxin in a woman, the higher the probability that she will develop endometriosis. This same chemical dioxin found in the fatty tissues of bears, even though they live hundreds of miles from cities, from towns. The bears and my health, your health, my fertility, our fertility, inextricably intertwined, because every womb has these toxins now. Your daughters, your sisters. Send word, bear mother. Send word, bear mother, I'm having a hard time. Send word, bear mother, I'm having a bad time. But I need to get out from under this black cloud of despair. And after all, I'm one of the lucky ones. I have surgery to remove my endometriosis, and now the bear is calling me out of my black cloud, out into the wild, out to see real bears. And so I travel to Alaska, and I go to Denali Park. It's a 6 million acre preserve. It's not really a park, it's a wilderness with no paths, just one road down the middle of it, and a bus that you ride on and drops you off and picks you up. And my first day in the park, I get out of the bus, and a mother grizzly and her 2 cubs appear out of the bushes right in front of me and saunter across the road, oblivious to me. And then later in the day, I hike and sit and watch another mother grizzly and her 2 cubs just living their life in the wild, digging in the dirt for ground squirrels. The cubs mimic her search for food, my breath taken away when she stands up, the sheer size, the majesty of this animal. And then suddenly, in a split second, she hurls her 800-pound body around it at a sight, a smell. She will protect her cubs from any threat, which seems to pass. And so she flops down on her back, and the cubs jump up on her. They nurse her. She shoos them away from her face. And then they jump down and stand up on their hind legs and bat at each other, and then roll on the ground like puppies. And yes, my grandchildren may never see a grizzly bear. And now 30 years later, after writing and performing a piece about the North American grizzly, the bear is calling me again, calling me out. Another endangered bear calling me from out of my black cloud. This time, though, the stakes are higher, because it's not only the grizzly bear that is endangered, not only our health, our fertility. No, this time, 30 years later, the existence of life on this planet is at stake. And I'm numbed by the numbers. I can't really absorb. 40 billion tons of carbon dioxide are dumped into the atmosphere every year. 40 billion tons equals the weight of everyone on Earth times 22. And so, yes, 22 is also the number of Gobi bears left. And I find myself buying tickets for destinations I can barely pronounce, like Ulaanbaatar, or UB for short, the capital of Mongolia, where I find myself 3 months later. Ulaanbaatar, a kind of cross between the old Soviet Union and, well, colossal Stalinist architecture, and Rome, where traffic is beyond crazy. And and Las Vegas, strip malls erupting out of the desert, construction from industrial cranes from Japan, Korea, Australia, taking place in every neighborhood, hovering everywhere like prehistoric birds of prey, going on all through the city, day and night, making it impossible to sleep, impossible to breathe, which is why after day 2 of being in the city, my eyes are burning, much as they were burning the fall of 2018 in Oakland. But yes, this is where I have come to meet up with my Mongolian guides, who are going to take me to the Mongolian Gobi Desert, where the Gobi Bear, or Mazale, as the Mongolians call it, live. Even though I know it's highly unlikely that I'll see one of only 22 bears living in the Gobi Desert that covers 500,000 square miles, still one hopes. I don't find out until I'm there, until the Gobi Bear tattoo wearing, chain smoking, reflective sunglass wearing, Mongolian pop song aficionado, motorcycle riding, 3 words a day, park ranger, and environmental inspector of Mongolia, as his sleeve states in English, until the park ranger Peru Dorje tells me that he's been working in the bear habitat of the Gobi Bear for 12 years. And he's never seen one, which should, of course, discourage me, but it only makes me relish the adventure all the more, because maybe this is our last chance. Well, certainly my last chance to see the only grizzly bear living in the desert, which means, of course, that I must live in the desert for a few weeks anyway, which I'm ready for, until I discover that getting in my tent in the desert at night entails not so much getting on my hands and knees as crawling on my belly, which those of you with knees over 60, you know what I'm talking about. It's not the getting down, it's getting up that is so difficult. But I assure everyone I'm fine. I'm 62, but I can do this, meaning hike and camp and travel 12 hours a day in a Toyota Land Cruiser bouncing over landscape that one moment looks like the American Southwest, and then the moon, and then simply a large gravel lot that stretches endlessly in all directions with nothing to hold it down. Just a boundless expanse with no amenities, no road signs, no buildings, no fences, no rest stops, no mile markers, no nothing, not even roads, just tire tracks going off in all directions. Guided, thankfully, by our Gobi Bear tattoo-wearing motorcycle riding ranger, who 5 days after leaving Ulaanbaatar and leading us through the desert, veers off suddenly in a cloud of dust into protected Gobi Area A, which is the habitat of the Gobi Bear, prohibited to anyone without special permission, which I have acquired, and entering a valley, an oasis between 2 mountains where we make camp in hopes of seeing this rarest of bears. And to that end, on day 3, are hiking up a remote ravine in the Gobi Desert. Yes, small, soft, black pancakes, the Gobi Bear, and then a little farther, blonde fur snagged on a thorn. There's no question. A Gobi Bear has been here very recently and could be anywhere. I may actually see what few humans have ever seen. Mazale.
That's a great excerpt.
I paid you to say that, but that's good.
You didn't pay me. No one paid me anything to do this interview.
Yeah, good. Yes, we hope it tantalizes your audience to find out what happens.
Whether or not you see a Gobi Bear or not.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And what they're like.
So a Gobi Bear is a grizzly bear that lives in the desert. Is that correct?
Correct. They're supposedly about 1/3 the size of North American bears. And one of the most interesting things is that they are vegetarian, which I find fascinating. I mean, here they are struggling to survive, and they're surrounded by wild sheep and wild goats and wild camels, as I say in the piece, a wet dream for any Montana grizzly. But they're vegetarian, and they dig in the dirt for wild rhubarb root and grasshoppers. So go figure. It's kind of fascinating. Yeah.
I assume how many grizzly bears are there left in the world?
I don't know about the world. In the lower 48, there are less than 1,000. There used to be 100,000, and now there are less than 1,000. And when you talk to people in Mongolia, people who've lived, who are older, they'll say, you know, I used to see the Gobi Bear quite a bit, and now I don't. And so they are literally hanging on by their claws, because 22 is not enough for a sustainable population. And so the scientists are building feeding stations with food pellets in them, which is kind of a little bit of a foretelling of what we probably will end up doing if things continue as they are. We will not have wild grizzly bears taking care of themselves. We'll have to feed them. Because once you interfere, you have to keep interfering, right? And so we've created this world now where they are depending on us to survive. So it's scary.
Why do you think there's less? I mean, it's horrible on either side of it, but why are there less Gobi bears than there are in Mongolia, which is the only place they live, right? Are there more in the bottom 48 here? Why do we have, do you know the difference between the?
Yeah, I suspect that that in the beginning there were less Gobi bears. I mean, I don't know, I can't say for sure, but my sense is that they were never at the great numbers that our grizzly bears were. I mean, if you can imagine 10,000 grizzly bears in California alone. I mean, you would go outside and you would be scared, as well you should be, because there would most likely be a grizzly bear. You know, usually they just run away. They don't attack you most of the time. That's one of those myths. They can if they feel threatened, but usually they just leave. They don't want to be around you. But yeah, so I think that there was not probably that number in the desert. And now, because of global warming, the scientists are seeing those numbers diminish as global warming is affecting all of the bears, because it affects the food, right? The food that they need to survive isn't growing, and so it has a direct impact on them. So, and Mongolian, the desert is turning even more into a desert, getting drier, getting hotter. Hunting has probably been a part of it too, just like with our bears. There's multiple reasons, but there's no question that the global warming crisis is affecting them.
So if it's kind of equal, there's 1,000 grizzly bears and there used to be 100,000.
Yeah.
So 1,000. So it might be that the 22 used to be 2,200, 22,000.
I don't know. I don't know if there ever were the kind of flourishing of grizzly bears that we had 150 years ago, you know.
So how do the bears in the wilds get dioxin in their blood or wherever?
We all do. It's in the air, it's in the water, it's in the soil. It's almost impossible not to get it. It's a byproduct of manufacturing everything from plastic bottles to toilet paper, and it simply exists everywhere in our food and in the air. We all have it. It's just a matter of how much. And when I first did the piece, they were just doing experiments on rhesus monkeys. And the rhesus monkeys were developing endometriosis if they got a certain, you know, that there was a parallel between the amount of dioxin they got and how many and what the probability was of getting endometriosis. Now, 30 years later, when I'm doing it, there have been studies on humans very recently that show a direct link between dioxin and endometriosis. Dioxin being one of those many, what they call endocrine disruptors, which basically is it's really creepy because it's essentially a con artist that goes into the body and masquerades. It plays with the endocrine order and disrupts it, and the body produces more and more protein. So it's getting the wrong signals, and it's creepy because it's in our reproductive cells that this is happening. Kind of like the most fundamental building blocks of life have been violated, you know.
And is endometriosis on the rise here?
Yes, it's an epidemic. 180 million women worldwide. It was once rare. I certainly didn't know I had it. I think many women don't know they have it. It's not something that it's hard to diagnose. The only way you really know it is if you go in and do surgery. So it's not something you can immediately diagnose, but there's plenty of signs, and it's only now sort of, I think doctors are waking up to it somewhat, but it's still not being treated nearly as much as it should be. And I was not on my radar screen growing up, right? It just you know, it just wasn't there. So it was a complete surprise to find out that that's what I had. And that was apparently causing my fatigue as well as my infertility. And so once I had surgery, I was able, well, we'll see. We'll see when we do our piece.
What happens post-surgery? What might pop out post-surgery?
That's right.
So, you know, I remember watching, I think your last show, which had parts of this in it, right? The one you were originally going to do at the Marsh years ago before you went to Mongolia.
Oh, yeah.
Be a tape, right? Or whatever you want to call it. DVD. And I remember just watching it and thinking, my goodness, she's such a good performer. Look at her eyes. Look at how she's performing. So you want to just go back a little bit and tell us, how did you become who you are? Did you go to acting? Were you in acting school, or, you know, what led up to this?
So when I went to Catholic U for a year, and this was back in the days when we still did women. I mean, women's roles were minuscule, and all the plays were by dead white men. There are wonderful white dead men. I am not against white dead men. It's just that if that's the only thing you're doing, you're missing out. And the roles were abominable, right? We all know that sort of a lot of the traditional American canon has pretty limited women's roles. And it was like I had to make my own. And then I discovered a traveling Jewish theater at a theater, alternative theater conference that happened in a tiny village in Minnesota in 1981. And I was just stunned. It was like, yes, this is what I want to do. This makes sense to me. It's political, but it's touching on so many layers and levels of spiritual, mythical, ancestral, and all doing it in a way that's nonlinear and using the body, the voice in ways that were so powerful with, you know, no set, no special effects, just the body as an instrument, which is so powerful. And yeah, long story short, then when I joined them, I'd say that was really where I learned a lot about the kind of theater that I ended up doing and have been doing, which is focused very much on language and text and story, narrative based, and recognizing the importance of story in keeping us alive and in recreating the moment, which is what I think the arts need to be doing, especially now in these dark times, and not just COVID, but because of the climate crisis. I think we're really being called on to reimagine the future. We really need artists to be doing that right now because everyone's freaked out. We're overwhelmed. We're numbed by the scary facts, but while it's important to be educated and know what's going on, it's also really important to be imagining how we want the world to be, and creating art and writing and thinking about what that is going to look like. And so, yeah, that's a long answer to your question, but that's sort of how it's developed over time for me. Yeah.
So you weren't an acting student. You weren't a theater
I was when I went to Catholic U for a year, you know, and it was fine, but I just didn't have it, you know.
You weren't learning anything there. There was nothing
to learn. There was one thing to learn. I mean, I wasn't interested in being in these very boring plays with roles for women that were just very empty, and not being challenged in the way I wanted to be challenged, and somehow knowing that there was something else I wanted to do. And so then discovering that kind of theater. Which as you know, which I also call slow theater, which is this idea that it takes years to develop a work. You don't do things quick, you know. You write a play in a weekend, you make a 10-minute play, you have a 1-minute festival. Fine, but what's the what are you left with? What's the real value of that? And I think it takes time, and all the sort of processes of slow food movement, you know, marinating and simmering and kneading and letting rise, and kneading and letting rise, and punch down again. I mean, all those processes that create these, you know, rich broths and incredibly flaky crusts. And, you know, what do you want to eat? Do you want to eat a chicken McNugget, or do you want to eat a meal that's been, you know, marinated chicken with, you know, chilies and incredible vegetables and spices for hours? And I mean, which would you choose, right? So it's sort of creating the equivalent of a theater work that has that, and I can feel it, and when I see a piece that's just been put up, as opposed to something that has, you know, has layers to it. So yes, I'm definitely still in the layers with this piece.
Who's doing work like this? Who's some work you like that's doing slow theater in this theater?
You know, that I have to say, Stephanie, that in the last year and a half, since I joined Extinction Rebellion, which is a climate activist group, I'm most interested in theater on the streets. That is, I know there's good theater going on. I don't doubt it, but we're in a crisis. I mean, we are in the biggest crisis humans have ever faced, biggest public health crisis, you might call it. And that's where my focus is right now. And so I'm interested in seeing work that is dealing with that. And a lot of the stuff, if you look up Extinction Rebellion in the UK, I mean, they're masters at it. And actually they started a group, which we also have now in the US, called the Red Rebel Brigade. And we're actually changing our colors here locally, but it is a costumed, okay, I have a picture. It's in the piece also. So elaborate red headdresses. And we move through a political action, kind of like a Buto Greek chorus, in slow motion, no speaking. We do not risk arrest, so we don't get ourselves into a place where we would get arrested, unlike people around us who are doing possibly civil disobedience. And we are embodying the emotions that none of us are expressing right now, which is the grief, the rage, the longing that we are all feeling, and we don't talk about it. And so for me, that's theater. Right, this sort of ritual, like combination of sort of Renaissance underwater sea creature is almost like what the costume looks like, and we have all these dangling pieces of material, and we're swishing through, and it's very powerful when you see 26 people just sort of marching in this thing. And so that actually has captured my attention more than conventional theater in regular theaters. Yeah, that doesn't totally make sense, but I'm just confessing the truth.
The truth will set you free.
Yeah, maybe, or not, but yeah.
I know you were saying there's a lot going on right now. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I think people get overwhelmed by the climate crisis. And I think it's important to, for me anyway, to sort of look at broad pictures. And so right now, the oil pipelines that are being built are really endangering all of us, endangering our health, and endangering the lives, the culture, the health of Indigenous people who are really reaching out to us. And this didn't used to be part of my radar. Like, I didn't used to think about these things, but I've really come to see over the last year and a half that, you know, this idea that somehow I'm separate from these women who are protesting right now in northern Minnesota in the freezing cold, where Enbridge, which is a construction company, is building the largest pipeline, oil pipeline in the United States, maybe even in history, putting it up very quickly. 2,000 some men not wearing masks, so not COVID safe. And this pipeline is going through Indigenous lands, through wetlands. The Ojibwe people are the only tribe that grows wild rice in the United States, and so it's going right through that. It's endangering, you know, the water, the rivers, and so a lot of people are either showing up there in Minnesota or doing what they can here. And actually, Brian is going to be putting up some links later at the end of the show or whenever. You can go to Stop the Money Pipeline, which I would really recommend people check out, because the real climate criminals right now are the banks, the big banks. Chase, Bank of America, Citibank, Wells Fargo are four of the biggest funders. And if you cut off the funding to the people who are building the pipelines and any of the fossil fuel industries, they can't keep building, they can't keep extracting, and they can't keep producing and transporting fossil fuel. So it's a really powerful and effective way to just focus on one really powerful thing, funding the pipeline that's funding fossil fuel, and try to end it. And a lot of activists now across the country are joined in that. Bill McKibben, the environmentalist and author, quite well known, is sort of leading the charge in this, along with Jane Fonda and others, specifically focusing on Chase, who is really the biggest funder of fossil fuel industry. And they just need to hear it from people that know. And here's something that's amazing. I just want to say this. So I was reading this book about The Future of Ice, I think is the name of it. It's about Greenland and about the melting ice. And in it, the scientists take a huge chunk of ice from the center of a glacier and study it. Don't ask me how they do this, but they do, you know, huge, deep, mile deep or whatever. And one of the scientists said, you know, I feel hopeful because you can look at this chunk of ice and literally look through time, right? So at the bottom, you can see during Roman times, you can see when they were melting down ore for silver, and so you see lead, and so you see the darkness of the ice, and then when that passes, then it becomes white again, and then you see when the Industrial Revolution started, and you see again, you see this lead in the ice, and then getting worse and worse, and then, do you remember when we outlawed lead, like lead gas, no more? He said, it's incredible. You can see it in the ice. You can see the moment we just decided as a country, no more lead. And it suddenly clears up. I mean, you know, we decided as a country, you know, we weren't going to have cigarettes advertised. We decided as a country that, you know, we were going to go into World War II. All it takes is will. We have all the capacity, the knowledge, the technology for much of it. much has to be still created, but it's just our will to do it. And I think that's important to remember. We've done it before, right? Remember when the ozone layer was disappearing and we banned the fluorocarbons that were causing that? So that makes me feel hopeful.
So this post-Trump regime, Biden, etc., have they been, what's the news there? How are they working on these pipelines? I heard they were stopping a pipeline somewhere, right?
Yeah, Biden, I mean, it was good to hear him come out against the Keystone Pipeline. He has not come out against this latest one, Line 3 pipeline. I think he's afraid of seeming too radical, right? I mean, it's so crazy that people who just think that we should have good health would be the extremists, and that the people who are literally creating illness and are slowly killing us. I mean, we know this. Scientists are telling us this isn't like politics or ideology or made up idea. I mean, we have, 11,000 scientists who are telling us this, that we are slowly killing ourselves because of carbon dioxide emissions. Yes, so, but he's afraid of being seen, I think, as being too extremist. But my God, I mean, the headlines are so much better than they were, but they still support fracking. They still, they aren't going far enough, but I'm really grateful for what's been done, and I'm hoping that activists will continue to be able to push him to make the kind of choices that we absolutely have to make. We can't wait. That's the thing. It's the window of time for us to act is getting smaller and smaller, and we have to act really quickly.
You may have said it or whatever, but what's the moment or the trajectory of your politicization, what is the word?
Yeah. I mean, I sound like a preacher, but as I've told you, my mother was a preacher, all her brothers were preachers, and all my cousins are preachers, so I get it honest. But so I know I sound like a preacher, and I'm getting honest, all of that. And that's new, because I've always seen my work as an artist as, you just do it, right? And it's the ripple effect, right? I mean, it goes out there and people get it or don't get it, whatever, right? But because of this crisis we're in, the climate crisis, this work really feels much more like a platform for me to talk about the urgency of this crisis and the need for people not to just realize that it's serious, which many of my friends do, but that it's urgent and that they need to figure out what they are going to do. And there's so many things you can do. I mean, you can take notes at a meeting, but join a group. That's my big thing. Do not try to do anything alone. You can't. It's overwhelming. And don't focus on reducing, recycling. I mean, that's good. That's good. I'm not saying don't do those things, but if you focus only on those individual things, we aren't going to have the kind of change that we need, which is why doing things like joining with a group to pressure the banks, and join with coalitions who are joining with other coalitions, then things start to happen. And we know we've had an effect because the banks have, for the first time, acknowledged the climate crisis. And even Chase has said, well, we're now going to align ourselves with the Paris agreements, whatever that means. They haven't yet, given specific policy or deadlines or schedules. And so that's the next step, of course, is saying, oh, really? You're aligning yourself? Well, and in that case, are you doing this, this, and this? But at least they're saying it. And that is because, I think it's because they are hearing it over and over from climate activists. So we are having an effect. And I think that's important for people to know.
Well, just anyone who's here, though, has a question or wants to make a comment or give a tip, please put it in the chat. We'll look at your questions. You can ask Helen questions. So you've got two things here. We've got your Mennonite history and the thing that popped out of you, right? You're kind of in between those two things right now that feels like that might have an impact on how you think about things, right? So what does it mean in, 2 minutes or less to be a Mennonite? Now, isn't it like being an Amish person?
Okay. So, first of all, being a Mennonite is sort of like being Jewish, right? You have people who are just culturally Jewish all the way to Orthodox. So with Mennonites, kind of the same thing. People feel sort of, connected ethnically, culturally, but maybe they don't believe anymore, all the way to Amish, which I would say are sort of like Orthodox.
So an Amish person isn't Mennonite?
Technically, no. So in the beginning, the Anabaptists, who were this break-off group, the heretics of the Reformation, it was all one thing. Anabaptists were one thing. And then they broke off into different groups. And the Amish and Mennonites broke off from one another over the issue of shunning. Amish believed in shunning, meaning you don't talk to and you don't have connection with someone who's sinned, And as people know, they still ride horse and buggies. They still dress in 16th century Swiss peasant costume, clothing. And, so they take very literally the idea of being separate from the world. Whereas Mennonites look like you and me. Pretty much, depending on what kind. So for me, the values that I grew up with as a Mennonite continue to have a really profound impact on me. Mennonites understand community, which is something I talk about in the piece. They care very deeply about the way you live. It's not what you believe as much as how you live your life. Some Mennonites wouldn't agree with that, but it's much more about living your life in a way that is consistent with the way Jesus lived, which was, compassion and simplicity and community and all these things. So I feel connected to it. I'm married to a Jew. I've been very influenced by Buddhism also. So there's all these streams going through me, but I have a deep, it was actually through traveling Jewish theater that I really reconnected with my Mennonite past, and came to really respect and honor those stories that I'd sort of gone, oh, I don't really want to, those martyr stories, it's too much, because they're heavy. It's really heavy, right? You're burned at the stake for your beliefs. Who wants that? But I've come to really to honor that and respect it and see it. And so it feels like a really important part of me. How's that for you?
That's good. So how did that kind of hook up with the traveling Jewish theater and being amongst all those Jews, the one non-Jew in the...
Yes, so I think because a traveling Jewish theater defined itself as an open door, not as a closed system. And I had actually the freedom to explore my Mennonite identity. Albert and I did a play about intermarriage in which I played a Mennonite wife and he played a Jewish husband, and they wanted to have a child. And their big question was, who will this child be? And that kind of freedom, I think, says a lot about who the theater was, who traveling Jewish theater was, and how they viewed identity and understanding the complexity of identity and the fact that we all have roots that define who we are, that are an important part of who we are, whether we like it or not, and whether they're wonderful or not. They're not always wonderful, right? But they are our roots, and we can't ignore them.
There's not much time, but then there's the thing that popped out, and
you're giving away the plot.
Well,
for the hundreds of people who are attending this.
I think it's okay, but just to talk about the other side of the ancestral legacy and the future generations, right? So,
yeah. Well, the central question for me in doing this piece was, What does it mean to be a worthy ancestor? I mean, really, what does it mean right now? What is our responsibility? And I'm not talking about just people who have children. I mean, anyone who has relationships with, you know, the next generation. We're all ancestors. And what does that mean? Given kind of the astonishing thing that I've realized, which is that it was over my lifetime, exactly over my lifespan of 60, almost 65 years, that it happened, that we went from being sort of okay in 1956, I mean, not great, but we weren't killing ourselves yet, to literally now being on a path, a trajectory of extinction of life. That has happened in my lifetime. While I was, you know, worried about myself and my career and what I was doing, and thinking whatever I was doing was important, and knowing sort of vaguely that there was this environmental stuff, but not really paying attention. This happened under our watch, right?
Or our not watch.
Or our not watch, precisely. And I mean, it's not that I'm trying to lay a guilt trip on people. It's just that it's a profound question.
I mean, it's kind of interesting to think about is it always the not watch? Or is there something about our lifespans? We're exactly the same age, practically, you and I. Is there something about what happened in our spans that allowed us to not pay attention to this?
I don't know about that, but I do know that the fossil fuel industry reached a level through the 70s, 80s, and 90s that went into that red zone of danger, danger, danger. That it didn't have to, but it did, and we aren't stopping it yet. And we have a responsibility to do that. I mean, it's one of the beautiful things when you're around, you know, Indigenous folks, and they talk about, I mean, not as an ideology, but as a reality, the seventh generation. I mean, they think about that. They think about what is the effect of the Enbridge pipeline on my, you know, on the seventh generations after me. So it's not just them, it's not just my health, my, you know, family, it's you're thinking ahead. And we do not do that as white folks. We just don't do that, right? Don't have any concept of that.
Well.
And on that light ending.
Yeah, it's 8:31. We're past our time. Is there anything you want to say to positive it out? I know you did say we might be stopping the banks, or we're working on.
Go in the chat room, folks, and check out the links. There's concrete stuff you can do, and there's a link there to Stop the Money Pipeline where you can find out more about it. There's a somewhere there's a tool. Anyway, there's a toolkit that actually has you know, here's letters you can write, here's what you say, there's real concrete things you can do. So I'm not leaving you with just an amorphous, oh, I should be doing something. There are really specific things you can do. And if you can't find what you think you need, my email address, I think is in there somewhere. Did I put it in there? Anyway, Helen@blackswanarts.org. Is my there we go.
Now. Brian put it in.
Brian put it in.
So
feel free to email me if you have questions, you want to know how to connect with the group, or if you have comments about dispatches or ideas or anything. I'm always welcome to. It's always great to hear from people. So yeah.
And come see the full show on Saturday night at 7:30. And if you can't make the live show, there will be a Q&A after. If you read some of this stuff and you have some questions you want to ask Helen after the show, we'll be back there doing a Q&A. It'll also run through midnight on Sunday.